Hello everyone. I hope you enjoy listening to the story. I was told my husband's comatose sister needed me while he took another woman to Europe, but the night I stayed alone in that ICU room, she opened her eyes and whispered that I was the only one not in danger. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old. And until recently I believed I had built a stable life out of quiet sacrifices. I used to work as a registered nurse in Raleigh, the kind who trusted charts, vitals, and clear answers, but after marrying Daniel, a respected surgeon with a calm voice and steady hands, I stepped away from my career because his family needed me more. His younger sister Lily had been in a coma for almost a year after what they described as a tragic accident, and caring for her became my full-time responsibility. First at home, and then in a private ICU wing arranged through Daniel's connections. At the beginning, I told myself this was temporary. That love sometimes asked for inconvenient things, but the longer I stayed inside that quiet, sterile room, the more I felt like my life had been placed on hold without my consent. Daniel stopped asking how I felt. His mother stopped pretending to appreciate me. And every decision about Lily's care was made above my head, delivered to me like instructions instead of conversations. When Daniel casually mentioned that he and his mother would be flying to Europe for a medical conference, I waited for him to say my name, to include me in the plan. But he only adjusted his watch and told me I would need to stay behind and monitor Lily closely, as if I were simply part of the equipment keeping her alive. I nodded because I had grown used to swallowing my questions. Yet something about the way he avoided my eyes left a cold weight in my chest that refused to settle. The ICU felt different after they left, quieter but not peaceful, as if the silence itself were hiding something. And I began noticing details that did not match the story I had been given. The overnight cameras flickered off at exactly the same time each night. Certain files in Lily's digital chart were locked behind permissions I did not have. And the nurses assigned to her case rotated too frequently for a long-term patient. I told myself I was overthinking, that exhaustion could make patterns out of nothing. But then I saw it, a subtle movement in Lily's fingers, not random, not reflexive, but almost rhythmic, as if she were responding to something only she could hear. I stood there longer than I should have, watching, listening, feeling the old instincts I had buried start to rise again. If you think this is just another story about a tired woman caring for a silent patient, then you have not yet heard what happened at exactly 2:17 in the morning, when everything I thought I understood began to unravel. I did not sleep that night, not really, because once doubt settles into your bones, it refuses to let you rest. I kept replaying every detail I had ignored, every small inconsistency I had brushed aside in the name of trust, and the more I thought about it, the more impossible it became to believe that Lily was truly as unresponsive as they claimed. I returned to the ICU just before midnight, the corridor dim and almost empty, the soft hum of machines echoing like a distant warning. Her room looked exactly the same as always, pale lights, steady monitors. The quiet illusion of stillness, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer just the obedient caregiver. I was a nurse again, observing, questioning, connecting patterns that refused to align. I checked her vitals first, heart rate steady, oxygen levels perfect. Muscle tone far too maintained for someone who had supposedly been immobile for months. I pressed lightly against her hand, watching for any response, and for a moment there was nothing. Just the same stillness I had seen 100 times before, but then I felt it, a faint pressure. Subtle yet deliberate, her fingers curling just enough to make my breath catch. I pulled back instinctively, my heart racing, telling myself it could be reflex, that the body sometimes reacts in ways that look intentional, but I knew better. And that knowledge terrified me more than any confirmation could. I stayed beside her bed longer than usual, pretending to adjust the sheets, glancing at the monitor, waiting, hoping, fearing that it would happen again, and when it did not, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Around 2 in the morning, the hospital settled into its deepest silence. The kind that makes every sound feel amplified, every movement suspicious. I was updating her chart when I noticed the camera light flicker, and then go dark. Just like it had the nights before, precise, controlled, as if someone had scheduled the blindness. My pulse quickened, and without fully understanding why, I stood up and moved closer to the bed. That was when it happened. Her hand shot out and wrapped around my wrist with a strength that no unconscious patient should possess. I gasped, nearly dropping the tablet. My body freezing as every instinct screamed at me to pull away, to call for help, to do something. But before I could react, her eyes opened. They were clear, focused, fully aware, and locked onto mine with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. "Do not react," she whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakably controlled. "Cameras are recording." I felt the world tilt, my thoughts scattering, yet somehow I forced myself to remain still, to keep my expression neutral. Because something in her gaze told me that whatever was happening was far bigger than shock. She slowly released my wrist and shifted slightly. Just enough to prove that what I was seeing was real, that the past year had been built on a lie. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but she shook her head almost imperceptibly. Then spoke again, softer this time, measured, careful. "You are the only one not in danger," she said, and those words landed heavier than anything else. Not in danger meant there was danger, real and immediate, and suddenly every strange detail, every controlled interaction, every moment of silence from Daniel and his mother began to form a pattern that made my stomach turn. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady as I leaned closer, pretending to check her breathing. "What is going on?" I murmured, barely moving my lips. "Everything you have been told is false," she replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "I am not in a coma, and I never was." The room seemed to shrink around me, the machines louder now, the air heavier. And I struggled to process the magnitude of what she was saying. "Why would they lie about something like this?" I asked, though a part of me already feared the answer. "Money," she said simply, "insurance, millions of dollars, and control. Your husband knows, your mother-in-law leads it, and you were brought in to make it legal." The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I could not breathe. "Legal caregiver," I whispered, understanding dawning with a sickening clarity. "If anything happens to me," she continued, "if the story changes, you take the blame, negligence. Malpractice, whatever they need, and they walk away clean." My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay steady, to keep playing the role I had been given, even as everything inside me fractured. Daniel had not just excluded me, he had positioned me. Placed me exactly where I would absorb the consequences of a crime I did not even know existed. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself, then opened them again, meeting Lily's gaze with something new, something sharper. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough to understand that pretending to be weak is sometimes the only way to survive." She answered, and there was no fear in her voice, only calculation. "I have been collecting proof, waiting for the right moment, and now that they are gone, we finally have space to act." The shift inside me was immediate and undeniable. The confusion, the hurt, the quiet acceptance I had carried for months began to burn away, replaced by something colder, clearer. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Lily's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, not warm, not comforting, but resolute. "Tomorrow they come back," she said, "and that is when we stop surviving and start ending this." The morning they returned, the hospital felt staged, as if every polished surface and carefully arranged detail existed to support a lie that had been rehearsed too many times to fail. I stood beside Lily's bed in my usual place, dressed in the same neutral scrubs, my posture calm, my face composed, while inside me every nerve was alert, every thought sharpened into purpose. Lily lay exactly as she always had when others were present, eyes closed, body still, breathing steady enough to pass any casual inspection. Yet I now understood that every second of that stillness was a decision, a performance designed to survive people who had never seen her as anything more than a tool. Daniel walked in first, his presence filling the room with the same quiet authority that had once reassured me, but now only made my stomach tighten. His gaze flicked over me briefly before settling on his sister. And for a moment I watched him the way I used to watch patients, detached, analytical, searching for truth beneath the surface. He showed no concern, no genuine emotion, only the practiced expression of a man who knew exactly what story he was supposed to tell. His mother followed close behind, her heels clicking softly against the floor, her eyes scanning everything with that familiar, controlled intensity, as if she were checking for flaws in a system she believed she owned. The hospital had organized a small fundraising event that afternoon in the adjacent conference hall. Something about raising awareness for long-term care patients, and Daniel had been invited to speak, to present himself as the devoted brother who had sacrificed everything for his family. The irony sat heavy in my chest, but I kept my silence, because Lily had been clear. Timing mattered more than emotion. Throughout the morning, I played my role perfectly, adjusting monitors, documenting vitals, responding politely when spoken to, all while quietly ensuring that every piece of evidence Lily had gathered was ready. She had hidden recordings, financial documents, and access logs in places no one would think to check. And together we had compiled everything into a single sequence that would be impossible to dismiss. By the time the event began, the room was filled with donors, hospital staff, and a handful of media representatives, all drawn in by the narrative of resilience and sacrifice that Daniel and his mother had carefully constructed. I stood near the back, partially hidden among the staff, watching as Daniel took the stage. His voice steady, his tone measured, speaking about love, responsibility, and the burden of watching someone you care about slip away. The audience listened in silence, some nodding, some visibly moved. And I felt a flicker of anger rise in my chest at how easily truth could be replaced by performance. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the large screen behind him flickered to life, exactly as planned. At first, it showed a slideshow of Lily's supposed journey, images curated to evoke sympathy. But then the sequence shifted, almost seamlessly, into something else. Audio played first, his voice, unmistakable, cold and calculating, discussing insurance claims, payout timelines, and legal positioning, followed by his mother's sharper tone outlining exactly how they would ensure no suspicion fell on them. The room changed instantly, confusion rippling through the audience. Murmurs spreading as the visuals transitioned to documents, account transfers, manipulated medical records, each piece connecting to the next with undeniable clarity. Daniel froze mid-sentence, his expression cracking for the first time. And his mother's composure shattered as she stepped forward, demanding the system be shut down, her voice no longer controlled but desperate. That was the moment Lily chose. The doors at the side of the hall opened quietly, and she walked in. Not slowly, not uncertainly, but with steady, deliberate steps that echoed across the room, drawing every eye toward her. Conversations died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt almost physical. Daniel turned, his face draining of color, his mouth opening without sound, while his mother staggered back as if she had seen something impossible. Lily stopped a few feet from the stage, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on them. And when she spoke, her voice carried clearly, stronger than anyone expected. "You told the world I could not speak," she said, "and yet here I am. You told them I was helpless, and yet I walked in on my own. Every word you said was a lie, and now everyone can see it." The impact was immediate, the narrative collapsing in real time as reality forced its way into the open. Security moved first, unsure whether to intervene, followed quickly by hospital administration. And then the unmistakable presence of law enforcement officers who had been alerted the moment the evidence began to play. Daniel tried to recover, stepping forward, reaching for some explanation, but his voice faltered. His confidence gone, replaced by panic that he could not conceal. His mother attempted to redirect, to claim misunderstanding, but the recordings continued, each one reinforcing the truth they could no longer deny. I stepped forward then, no longer hiding, no longer silent, and met his eyes as recognition settled in. "You said I was nothing," I told him, my voice steady, carrying farther than I expected. "But it turns out I was the only one who did not know your plan. That was your mistake." Officers moved in, their actions calm but decisive, placing restraints on his wrists as he protested, his words tumbling over each other, shifting from denial to anger to something that almost sounded like pleading. His mother followed soon after, her resistance weaker, her composure completely gone, replaced by a hollow expression that mirrored the collapse of everything she had controlled. As they were led away, Daniel twisted back, his eyes searching for me, his voice breaking as he called my name like it still meant something, like I still belonged to him. I did not respond. I simply watched, standing beside Lily, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle into something quieter, something steadier. For the first time in a long time, I was not reacting, not enduring, but choosing. And as the room slowly filled with noise again, questions, whispers, disbelief, I realized that the story they had built was gone, and in its place stood the truth, undeniable and finally free. The days that followed did not feel real at first. As if I were moving through a version of my life that had been rewritten overnight without giving me time to catch up. Statements were taken, reports were filed. And every piece of evidence Lily and I had gathered became part of something much larger than either of us had imagined when we first stood in that silent ICU room. The hospital launched an internal investigation immediately, distancing itself from Daniel and his mother as details of the fraud surfaced, and law enforcement moved quickly, building a case that stretched far beyond insurance claims into conspiracy, falsified medical documentation, and attempted legal manipulation. I sat across from attorneys more times than I could count, answering questions, recounting events, clarifying timelines, and each time I spoke, I felt something inside me settle, as if every word helped return a piece of myself that I had slowly given away without realizing it. For months, I had lived in a space where my voice did not matter, where decisions were made for me, where my role was to support, to comply, to remain quiet, and now I was being asked to speak, to define what had happened, to stand firmly in my own truth without hesitation. Lily was there through all of it, no longer hidden behind silence, no longer forced into stillness. Her presence steady and deliberate as she provided her own testimony, filling in the gaps I could not see, confirming the patterns I had only begun to suspect. Together, we were no longer pieces in their design, we were the ones dismantling it, layer by layer, until nothing remained but facts that could not be denied. The legal process moved faster than I expected, driven by the volume of evidence and the clarity of intent behind it, and within weeks, formal charges were filed, followed by hearings that drew attention from both the medical community and the public. Daniel's name, once associated with skill and trust, became tied to betrayal and calculated deception, and his mother's reputation collapsed alongside his, revealing a history of control and manipulation that extended far beyond what I had personally experienced. I was advised to remain cautious, to avoid public statements, to let the process unfold through official channels, and I followed that guidance, not out of fear, but because I understood now that control did not come from reacting impulsively. It came from choosing when and how to act. When the court proceedings concluded, the outcome felt less like a victory and more like a necessary correction, a rebalancing of something that had been tilted for far too long. Daniel faced multiple charges and the certainty of prison time, his attempts to negotiate or deflect responsibility failing under the weight of documented proof, while his mother, once so composed and commanding, stood quietly as her own role was outlined in detail, her influence no longer something she could hide behind. As for me, the court recognized my position for what it was, not a participant, but a target, someone placed deliberately in harm's way to protect others. And with that recognition came both legal protection and financial compensation that I had never asked for, but accepted as part of closing a chapter one had not chosen to enter. When the final transfer appeared in my account, I did not feel triumph, I felt clarity. A quiet understanding that what mattered was not the number attached to it, but what it represented, acknowledgement, independence, and the end of a system that had reduced me to a role I never agreed to play. I left the hospital shortly after, not because I could not continue there, but because I wanted to return on my own terms. Not as someone tied to a past that had nearly defined me. I took time to breathe, to reconnect with the parts of myself I had set aside, and eventually, I stepped back into nursing. This time choosing my position carefully, working with a team that valued transparency, respect, and the kind of integrity I had once assumed was universal. Lily moved forward as well, her life expanding in ways that had been denied to her for years, pursuing opportunities she had only been able to imagine while confined to a role she never truly inhabited. We stayed connected, not out of obligation, but because what we had been through created something stronger than circumstance, a shared understanding that did not require constant explanation. Months passed, and the intensity of everything we had experienced began to soften, replaced by routines that felt grounded and real, until one afternoon, as the light shifted across my living room floor, there was a knock at my door that brought the past back into focus. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, thinner than I remembered, his posture no longer confident, his eyes carrying a weight that had not been there before. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between what we had been and what we had become. And then he exhaled slowly, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I know I have no right to be here," he said, "but I needed to see you. To say that I understand now what I did, what I let happen, and I am not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to make something right." I listened without interrupting, not because his words held power over me, but because I wanted to hear them without the distortion of old emotions. When he finished, I took a breath, steady and certain, and met his gaze with a calm that felt unfamiliar but right. "There is nothing for you to fix here," I said, not unkindly, but without hesitation. "What you broke is not something you get to repair now, not for me." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer but needed to hear it spoken aloud, and for the first time, I saw him not as the man I had married, but as someone separate from my life. Someone whose choices no longer define my direction. I closed the door gently after he left, not out of anger, but out of clarity. And as I turned back into my home, the quiet felt different, not empty, not uncertain, but complete. I had once believed that strength meant holding on, enduring, proving that I could survive whatever was placed in front of me. But I understood now that real strength was knowing when to step away, when to refuse the roles others tried to assign, when to choose myself without apology. What began in a silent ICU room had ended in something far greater than exposure or justice. It had given me back my voice, my choices, and the ability to define my life on my own terms. And that was something no one could ever take from me again. 3 months later, my life no longer resembled the one I had been forced to live in silence. And for the first time in years, every decision I made felt entirely my own. The apartment I moved into overlooked a quiet stretch of the city, where the mornings came in soft waves of light instead of the harsh glow of hospital monitors. And the nights carried a stillness that no longer felt like something hiding secrets. I returned to nursing, but not in the way I had before. I chose a smaller clinic, one that valued transparency and patient dignity. A place where I could trust not only the system but also myself again. Each day I worked, I felt the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming grow clearer, not as a rejection of my past, but as proof that I had survived it without losing everything that mattered. Lily and I stayed close, not bound by obligation but by something deeper. A shared understanding that did not need constant words. She moved to Asheville and began building a life centered around her own choices, free from the performance she had been forced to maintain for so long. Sometimes we would talk late into the night, reflecting on everything that had happened, not with bitterness, but with a quiet awareness that what we had endured had reshaped us in ways we could not ignore. One afternoon, as I stood on my balcony watering a row of small plants I had carefully chosen, the doorbell rang. And something about the timing made my chest tighten before I even reached the door. When I opened it, I found Daniel standing there, accompanied by his mother. Both of them looking diminished in ways that went far beyond appearance. The confidence they once carried had been replaced by something fragile, uncertain, as if the world they had controlled had finally turned away from them. Daniel spoke first, his voice low, stripped of the certainty I once knew so well, explaining that he had lost everything, his position, his reputation, and that the future he had once taken for granted no longer existed. His mother stood beside him in silence, her posture no longer rigid with authority. Her eyes lowered in a way I had never seen before. They asked for help, not directly at first, but through implication, through the kind of careful words that tried to soften what could not be undone. I listened without interrupting, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to hear the full weight of what they had become after everything had collapsed. When Daniel finally asked if there was any way I could assist them, even temporarily, I felt no anger rise within me, no desire for retaliation, only a clear and steady understanding of where I stood. I told him calmly that I did not hate him, and that the absence of that emotion was not forgiveness, but closure. I explained that the version of me who would have sacrificed herself to fix something broken no longer existed, and that what they were asking for belonged to a past I had already left behind. His mother looked up then, her eyes searching mine for something she could hold on to, but I offered nothing beyond honesty. I had once asked them for kindness, for respect, for acknowledgement, and they had given me silence in return, and now that the roles had shifted, I chose not to repeat the same pattern in reverse. I closed the door gently, not out of spite, but because there was nothing more to say, and as I turned back into my home, I felt a sense of finality settle around me like something long overdue. I walked to the balcony, letting the air move freely through the space, and for a moment I stood there in complete stillness, aware of how far I had come from the woman who once believed endurance was the same as strength. What I understood now was simpler and far more powerful. Strength was not found in holding on to people who diminished you, nor in proving your worth to those who had already decided to ignore it. It was found in recognizing when something no longer deserved your presence, and in having the courage to walk away without looking back. If you had been in my place, standing at that door with the past asking for another chance, would you have opened it, or would you have chosen, like I did, to finally close it for good? What I learned from everything is simple, but not easy. Dishonesty does not begin with big lies. It begins with small silence, with the moments we choose not to question what feels wrong. I ignored the signs because I wanted peace, but truth always demands a price. And the longer you delay it, the higher that price becomes. Real strength is not just exposing others. It is being honest with yourself before the damage spreads. If this story made you think, or reminded you of something you once ignored, take a moment to reflect. And if you want more stories about truth, betrayal, and powerful comebacks, make sure to subscribe. Like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.